Hello, and welcome to Connecting Hope. In today's episode, we will be covering the Emergency Support Function 6 mass care and how it relates and serves before, during, and after a disaster. Joining me for this discussion will be Lee Lau, State Mass Care Coordinator and employee of the Mississippi Department of Human Services, as well as Chase Monroe from the American Red Cross and Will Trueblood from the Salvation Army Emergency Disaster Services. We hope today's conversation will center around how mass care is mobilized and coordinated in partnerships that are strategic to bring specific care to communities in crisis following a natural disaster. So let's start by introducing our guests today. We'll start over here to my left. Chase.
Hey, good morning. I'm Chase Monroe with the American Red Cross, and I'm the Mass Care Program Manager for Alabama and Mississippi.
Next, our guest and co-host for today's segment, Lee Lau.
Not co-host. My name is Lee Lau. I am with Mississippi Department of Human Services, and I'm the State Mass Care Coordinator.
My name is Will Trueblood, and I just do whatever Lee says.
That's a great title.
Yeah. It is. I am with the Salvation Army. I am the Emergency Disaster Services Director for the Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi Division. Say that 10 times real fast.
Yeah.
With both of your titles, I think we have to take a deep breath before we actually say them, right? Welcome to Connecting Hope, and we hope that your insights and your wisdom will help inform our public, really, what goes on behind the scenes and out front during the course of a disaster and how all of that chaos is organized and brought together to support Mississippians. So first question is what is an emergency support function? I'm just going to turn that over to our panel to kind of flesh that out.
All right, I'll start and kind of look at my partners actually during the ESF, during the disaster response. So Emergency support function came out of the National Response Framework, and it is a way for us, as agency, non-government entities, and community partner to organize and support the local when their resources are tapped out. Can I use the word tapped out?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, when the resources are expand, the capability are stretched, and they no longer can, support they locally, and then look for the state or federal for support.
So it really comes down to that, and I'm going to give that to Chase and Will, to the work of other entities. It's not one entity working together.
Never.
The response framework prevents, as I use that word, chaos, prevents chaos from happening in the midst of a response. So again, emergency response framework, emergency support function.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's that framework that lets us really work together. It formalizes those relationships so that during a disaster we have some clear reporting lines so that information isn't muddled, and it really does work well.
And then also we are not stepping on over each other. Kind of like right now is steady state. We're coordinating, we're making plans, and kind of understanding what that structure would look like once we're mobilized.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the topics that hasn't really been touched on, though, is the kind of the same way the ICS creates a uniformity. And so you understand, like the ICS structure, terms, titles, things like that. In a similar way, the National Response Framework created the ESF functions. So that way it's universal across the board. So when you're talking the same language across state lines, you're not dealing with one state doing things one way, another state doing things another way. You're all able to speak the same language, which gives us an ability to all be on the same page in these situations.
And that's important because on large events, we'll have support that comes in from each of our organizations from far afield, and having that ability for everyone to know the way that we coordinate and work together, and that common framework really is helpful.
Absolutely.
So there are about 15 emergency support functions. And in reality, y'all are grouped within Emergency Support Function 6, which is called Mass Care. And just as Will mentioned, on the ground, you're going to be organized within your incident command structure. That's the way that the incident on the ground, and really as it's coordinated, even from a larger scale where you have multiple incidents going on at one time, that coordinates really and makes sure that service delivery continues in an effective way. In similar way, the state and federal are organizing all of those different resources that are there. We know that in a storm, so let's lay this emergency support function 6, you also have a support function for public utility. You also have one for public information.
Right.
You have other ones, one in ESF8 that is in health services. So all of those are broken out in transportation. Some of those other pieces, they're broken out in order to bring competencies together and ensure that when a crisis has happened, and it's, you mentioned, tapped out resources in a local community, all of a sudden we know where to drive. You have experts actually brought together versus working in isolation.
Right.
So let's talk about specifically ESF6 and mass care and what all that entails, kind of leading on into from preparedness, immediate response, intermediate recovery, and then long-term recovery, because there's a lot of pieces in there that start flowing together, and it's partners from the Red Cross and Salvation Army, those that are recognizable nationally, but it's also local partners and smaller entities as well as government agencies. So let's start there. ESF6, what does mass care do? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think I want to look to Chase, because I remember when we usually do the presentation, talk about mass care. Remember the newsprint? You want to talk about the mass care? Like what do you conjure up?
So mass care for us, it really has 4 different buckets. So you have sheltering, you've got feeding, you've got distribution of emergency supplies, and family reunification. Naturally, mass care is going to be at its peak during that response phase, but in that preparedness phase, there's a lot of readiness activities that we all need to do together and with our own organization to make sure that we have the pieces in place so that we're able to scale to really whatever size disaster we end up getting hit with. But yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what mass care is.
And to that point, you mentioned you're working behind the scenes year-round to prepare, and I go to the Red Cross and the Salvation Army. Y'all have resources strategically stationed in order to quickly mobilize.
Absolutely, and that is one of the benefits of being a national organization. Is I have across my region, my 3 states, I have 31 different local organizations. We call them corps, but I have 31 local corps that I can resource out to, that I can get resources from or personnel from or things like that I need, which is really helpful when you're dealing with mass care in a state when hundreds of thousands of people have been impacted.
And that points to the work that both the Red Cross, Salvation Army, Baptists that are critical to a lot of service delivery, Lutheran Disaster Services, St. Vincent de Paul, all of those that we see come together. Y'all have the resources, though. When we talk about, many people get the idea of a large disaster, think the hurricane, the tornado that takes out a whole town like, unfortunately, Smithville, Mississippi, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But they don't think about the ability to mobilize even on a local level with a small house fire or a large house fire, a significant industry disaster, chemical spill. All of those things, because of local infrastructure that y'all are building year-round, allows you to provide that mass care. So where do we how does all of that bring in together? Because you're working as independent organizations, but again, how is it brought together in a disaster response from the local level all the way to the large scale?
I would say the most important thing from my perspective is the blue sky conversations. That's what it really comes down to, is the fact that when we're not in disaster time, it's building those relationships. Like we were just, before we started talking about some of this stuff earlier, when we were all sitting in the room, we were discussing people we know, common friends that we all have and things like that. And what those relationships do for us is they allow us to call people on a personal basis during times of disaster, rather than more of a professional, let's go through all of the proper channels. It allows me to reach directly out to Chase or to Lee and to say, hey guys, we have X, Y, and Z. but it's because of those blue skies conversations. It's because of that time during the preparedness phase where we're building those relationships at the VOADs and things like that, that allow us to have a more robust response where we're not duplicating efforts. Because now I know what Chase is doing and I know what Lee's providing, and that helps us in that sense.
Right.
I'm going to turn straight to Lee. As State Mass Care Coordinator, your job is to essentially coordinate, but bring things together, but
Correct.
help facilitate those conversations.
Yeah, in a uniform way. And then I think I want to touch back to, disaster response, we're taking care of the whole community. And when we use the word whole community, it comprises of multiple, you want to talk about, when people, functional access need, people who are transportationally challenged, who are deficient maybe in language, English proficiency, and some other, I think, seniors, and also in any sort of health condition. And that's just one, I call it a bucket. There's also additional bucket, and it's just basic locality. Go back to, I know Will had mentioned some of the informal one, and then we also, as a state level and then county level, even local community, they have regular meetings. So one of the key things we always have at MEMA is the state ESF meeting, and then also for us, we have our annual, for MDHS, we have our annual county ESF6 meeting where the county are organizing, inviting partner to come, and then so have the plan. The county also have an ESF6 plan on the local level, and then have a discussion. And one of the key discussion will be, sheltering. Do we have sufficient shelter facility? Who are our feeding partners? Who are all the other partners that can provide health services, crisis counseling, spiritual care? There's also all that other additional services to support the whole community.
Absolutely.
And using those meetings, that's for us a core way that we help build mass care capacity in the community. Because when we come to those meetings, we want to be, brutally honest about exactly what capacity that we have local to that community, and importantly, what the delta between that and what the needs that we see. Getting everybody kind of on board on the same piece of paper to say, hey, this is what this community really ultimately needs. This is where we are. How can we together come up as a community and figure out how do we meet that? Are there groups that we can target to get trained as additional Red Cross volunteers? Are there different vendors we haven't tapped into, different partners that might have buildings that they'd be willing to open up to us?
And some of the national partner that Red Cross had, or some of the contact that Will might not have, but Red Cross does, had a good relationship, and they can forge that relationship and they can partner on. I like what Chase said. It's never about, it's a brutally honest conversation. Is not saying everything's great. We have plenty of shelter facility. I can tell you, no one ever going to have plenty of shelter facility because we don't know what is 2 days, 3 days down the line. If we have a catastrophic event, there would be no shelter facility enough anywhere. Doesn't have to be Mississippi. Doesn't that's take Florida, California, any state. No. But at the same time, is that having that conversation, knowing what's out there, but at the same time is not to act. It's always the action. What can we do? What is that capability we can shore up and build up? It's like an onion. I feel like it's an onion. You build one layer, another layer, and go back to my job. My job, I don't have all the answers. All my answers lie within my partners, and they get called a lot from me. And I do get county have funnel their way and saying we need resources. We need to open a shelter, but we're lacking X, Y, Z. That's where the partner comes in. The support.
I love that you said I don't have to have all the answers. That's why we have partnerships. That's essentially, in a nutshell, why we have an emergency support function. Is because everybody has their strength and capabilities. The one thing that I want to bring out, thinking towards, we know that a flood may be coming in Vicksburg. We can forecast that flooding. A lot of weather forecasting models gives us a heads up even 4, 5, 7 days out of a tornado coming. Obviously, sometimes we can't predict when chemical spill or other types of disasters may happen, but the sheltering piece and immediately caring for those life-changing needs, there's things that also, it's not just standing up a shelter. It has to be a suitable location. There's all those things that you guys are putting into place, making sure that whether Red Cross has the shelter is the food capability coming from another partner like the Salvation Army, and securing that location to make sure that safety and security are there, that it's staffed with personnel. I think that's one thing that's kind of hidden in MDHS's role in this is when those shelters are opening, it's usually our economic assistance staff that are jumping in there for you, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, to jump in and kind of support, I'm going to look at Red Cross because as their primary sheltering agency for the state of Mississippi. And yeah, we're there to support Red Cross as the managing entity for that shelter to ensuring that to take care of the masses, ensuring the success
Yeah,
of the
absolutely.
operation.
And it's a great partnership. We always want to have shelters staffed as locally as possible. I talked about building that mass care capacity.
Correct.
But like you mentioned, there's a lot of communities that we just don't have quite enough local people that can immediately respond. And we've got this wonderful relationship with Mississippi Department of Human Services that if we open up a Red Cross shelter and we need for 2 or 3 days to have some additional staff support, y'all can loan us some folks while we mobilize people from outside of the immediate area to kind of come in as that cavalry support. So it really does make a big difference for the people of Mississippi.
And I want to
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to touch on the local, helping the local is very important, especially as someone who is experiencing the emergency, the disaster, and you walk into the facility, you see a familiar face, you see somebody is, from that community, and they understand the culture of that community, they understand the social economic of that community, they understand like the word usage, anything things we might not think about, and I think everyone can say we're very unique in Mississippi, and north, south, middle, east, everywhere, central, everybody have their local uniqueness, and that's what made Mississippi so wonderful. So go back to what Chase said, local helping local is extremely important. So I value this partnership, and I think, but looking for both partner, I know they have national capability, that national cavalry can come in and support, yes. That's also the other side, the other additional layer of the onion. We can't, Mississippi, I'm so glad that other people from out of state can come in and to support us. Sometimes we can support us a couple days, 2 weeks, and then after a while, I'm going to say yes, we need additional support to come in.
And the conversations we have around that ESF6 framework really allows us to all coordinate because we're all independent agencies. Both Salvation Army, Red Cross, we're volunteer driven. It makes us a little bit different than most of the other state or federal entities that you see working around MEMA. But when we are talking about needing to scale up, we can talk about what capabilities do you have that you can bring? Because if we have local inherent capacity from another agency that we can supplement what we're doing with, that can offset the need to have to fly in additional resources, and that does make a difference.
Right.
And you hit on it, Chase, a little bit when you were just talking about like the supporting each other function. Like just recently I saw a disaster that I was helping out with in another division, and they specifically, the Red Cross came to us and said, hey, we need feeding. Yeah. Well, we didn't have any kitchens. We were working with our Southern Baptist partners. And so we reached out to our Southern Baptist partners and said, hey, they need a kitchen over here. And they were able to mobilize one of their kitchens and put it right at the shelter. So that way they could prepare food for the mobile feeding trucks going out, but at the same time also provide meals at the shelter. So the Southern Baptist really came through, and it comes from those partnerships and that ability to work with each other. But when we talk about sheltering, I think one thing that often gets forgotten or overlooked is we tend to focus on the displaced people who have lost homes, who have lost power, that now need shelter. But we can sometimes forget about the people that have already been displaced, the ones that were in shelters before the disaster hit. Because now what you're creating is a disaster within a disaster.
Right.
This family is now homeless, they have nowhere to go, and they're living in a shelter, and now a storm is coming directly for them, and it's where do these people go? What do we do with the people who are the most vulnerable of our populations when it comes to sheltering? Because now you're talking about packing entire families up and moving them across the state temporarily, and there's a lot of logistical work, and again, it goes back to those partnerships, having those conversations, and being able to call our partners at the Red Cross or at ESF6 and saying, hey, we have a shelter with 20 families.
Right.
that we need to get out of this area. Where can we get them safely? And it comes down to that communication and those conversations.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. You know, we have seen you know, an uptick recently in the number of large-scale responses that we've been you know, participating in, and it's really created a lot of complexity for families that have recurrent disasters, and you have some compounding effects that come into. So we're still you know figuring out that together. You know, how do we best meet those needs that are compounding?
Yeah, and listening, hearing that, I always want to say, don't let any disaster go to waste, and then always view that as an opportunity for that family, because I'm sitting next to two very compassionate organization representatives, both very compassionate individual also, and a lot of people are work in disaster is a choice they make. And they are extremely compassionate. When we have issue like that, one family, usually that will, I call it bubble up to the ESF6 desk, and it will be communicated, and people are looking for resources. And amazingly, how many organizations will come on board and to support, and that to me is an opportunity for that family, and never should go to waste. And then I'm so proud of our partners. Everyone always step up and do the right thing, and then and even the organization don't have that capability, they start going through their contact and then start calling and start seeing what, and then with that kind of helped me as a state mass care coordinator. It become a resource list. It add on a resource. And I want to go back to our organization, Mississippi Department of Human Services also. We as an agency, not only for our day-to-day, what we do is amazing. The resources, I can tell you last, I think emergency, Aging Adult Services was involved. You know, it was a family, they encountered, it was some issue, and it came to the ESF6 desk. And I was like, I know who I need to call. Yeah, and then, my colleagues step up and do what they do. And so for that family, they were taken care of. And that situation was pre-existing already there. But because of disaster, you have the FEMA folks walking door to door checking on things. You have MEMA folks checking on things, and they see what's going on.
So I want to turn to the effect, though, of a lack of coordination. That's also the elephant in the room. Never happened. Each one of you could tell stories. I appreciate the heart, but there's also so much to that people just start showing up. It can actually create stresses on a local community. It can create stresses on law enforcement or minimized access to electricity or hotel rooms. And by having the ESF mass care coordination going on, you're preventing a more complex disaster from actually coming on board. Another disaster within a disaster. You don't have tennis courts full of boxes of clothes that people just come and drop. And that's the importance of having coordination, is making sure that resources are getting as quickly as possible. Both of your organizations, one of your first talking points is if you want to help, the best is to provide financial support or cash or to come volunteer. Those are going to be your first two calls.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you want that coordinated. Y'all are working to coordinate that within your own organization, but also working to coordinate that donation message through mass care, and to make sure that there are specific needs that are being identified. Because at some point, you can stress a system so much that you're doing more harm than you are actually capable of doing good. And that's not what we want to put into a local community. So if y'all want to share a little bit about what we need to do to encourage people to be engaged locally or with recognized entities that are doing mass care if they want to help.
Yeah, I would say right off the bat, I know Chase has seen this, like when it comes to full-scale mass care response, the number one duplicating services issue we've seen has been feeding.
Agree.
And that's just been because there's been, even at times like our organizations, we work well together. We have great conversations and things like that. But even there are times where our vehicles will be on the same street and we have to sit and coordinate, okay, well, let's move over to this neighborhood instead. But I know for us, like we hit the weekends, and I'm sure Chase has seen this himself. We hit the weekends and everybody with a food truck
Right.
or anybody that every church that has the capacity suddenly wants to open up, and all the volunteers want to start serving on the weekend. And so there's this mass influx of food on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, because everybody's free on the weekend. They all want to give their time, they all want to give their effort. And then we've been serving all week, so we have meals planned out, we have locations planned out, we know where we're supposed to be, when we're supposed to be there, but then suddenly this influx of food throws everything off, which is why the coordination piece is so important. Even if they want to be involved in things like that, we support and we welcome that, but it's a matter of coordinating with the national partners, the state agencies, and saying this is what we'd like to do before you just do it. Because then it allows us to say, hey, we welcome that. We can cut our meals down and put your food truck over here and things like that.
And coordinating that in advance is really important because there's a lead time for producing meals, and you know, it sometimes can be hard to pivot like same day, you know, because they go, wheels are already in motion, you know, this has already been prepared. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, you talked about you know, ways that people can help when they say, okay, there's going to be a disaster at some point in my community, and I know I'm going to want to help. I'd say the best thing that folks can do is to find an organization, join it now, you know, get the training, learn, you know, how within that organization's framework can they best fit in. Yeah, and
take training.
Exactly, get trained for a unique role, and that's really helpful. I think that it's great that we have an outpouring of folks that want to volunteer right after a disaster, and you know, we will work with those folks and figure out, you know, tasks within like a shelter or a distribution site that makes sense, that you don't need a lot of training and you can kind of work with somebody. But yeah, absolutely. The generosity of the American people is why both of our organizations, you know, exist.
Absolutely.
So we talked about coordination. Let's talk about some of the things that if people, the storm's coming down, some of the things that people can expect as maybe a hurricane, or we know a storm's coming, what y'all are doing, but also what can they expect service delivery wise? What are some of the services that Mass Care is going to drop, and then also maybe y'all get at the same time some of those tips that people need to be prepared themselves for when that storm's coming in, and it's coming in. Unfortunately, everybody, the first question within an hour is, where's Salvation Army, where's Red Cross, where's whoever, and what's that responsibility of the communities as well?
I'll start. I'll think first, you know, always, and then you hear a lot, you know, first 72 hours, you're on your own. And when I said that is, you're not on your own, but you need to prepare yourself, thinking that for 72 hours, what can I do if nobody can reach me? And then back to the meeting we have, you know, the county meeting, that's for you to kind of see what's your gap. And then you have neighbors, you have friends and families, and you have your church family, you have even your work families, and all that can just have a thought, think about it. What can you fortify yourself for 72 hours? And that's helping your community. That's helping these partners, organization, because at the beginning of an emergency response is saving lives. They're going to save lives, and then next thing you know is that, you know, putting a roof over your head and
immediate life-sustaining needs.
Right.
And the problem with that, because she's absolutely correct, we've all heard it, the first 72 is on you. You know, because we've all heard the saying, it resounds, it goes in all our trainings and things like that, so we know it. The biggest issue is, I read somewhere recently that Mississippi was 50th out of 50 states in per capita income. So you're dealing with vulnerable populations and people that don't have a lot. They're triaging. And they're looking at their lives and thinking, where am I going to get my next meal? How am I going to feed my kids? And when you're looking at them and telling that family that's looking at, how am I going to keep my lights on? How am I going to keep my kids in this house? How am I going to keep my home operational? And then saying, by the way, make sure you get yourself a generator. Get enough fuel to run it for 72 hours. Make sure you have enough food to feed your family for 72 hours. They're going, I don't have enough food to feed my family for the next 24 hours, let alone 72 during a disaster. And so we're looking at very vulnerable populations and then asking them to make this a priority, and that can be difficult. those are difficult conversations to have, because you're looking at them saying, this is what you need to do, and they're going, no, no, what you're saying I need to do doesn't align with what my actual life is over here. So that's a hard conversation to have.
That's a beautiful point to make, is that the majority of the people that the Mississippi Department of Human Services encounters in our case management on a daily basis, they're living life almost hour by hour financially. And now you're asking them to invest $50 to $100 in shelf-stable food supplies to keep. And so I'm going to highlight something. Maybe it's a call to action, not to the Salvation Army Red Cross, but those local churches. If you're wondering what you can do to help your low-income and your vulnerable at-risk populations, maybe look at FEMA's suggested items to help low-income family, any family, be prepared for that 72 hours. And we're talking, little canned foods that are shelf-stable, beans, and whatever goes in those. Help. It's our job. It's incumbent upon us, from a compassion standpoint, to recognize that not everybody lives in the world where they can keep food supplies. And you get to the end of it, you look at the end of the week or end of the paycheck, and you're saying, I need my preparedness box today.
Yeah, and then I go back to, still have, I feel like, for that family, awareness is one thing, and that's key. And then knowing that I can't. And then now, that's where the community come in. And then for me, personal level, yes, I can, but then now I have awareness that there might be my community that can. And you can start a program. You can go to your church and ask, and say, what can we do? A lot of churches have pantries. Let's do a disaster pantry, or get some of the organization to come in, do some training, or just a program presentation kind of awareness. I strongly feel like an individual can start a movement, start anything. But this is exactly a great point. A lot of people don't prepare because they don't have the means to do so. But does not stop you to have that conversation.
So let me encourage you, though, even though we're talking from a state level coordination, every county EOC is going to be broken down and organized in a similar response format. So even if it's not a statewide response, what we're encouraging is those churches, those entities that are involved, to go ahead, though, and contact and coordinate that through even their local EOC, so that local EOC is aware of the resource that's available. Exactly. They are the ones that have identified those pockets of need.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring up the local emergency management. That's one thing, reaching out, the general public can reach out to emergency management. And they, working actively just like all of us, trying to have resource lists, knowing what organization provide what. And then that they also have communication line to both of the partners and additional ESF6 partners. And then you had mentioned VOAD. Do you want to talk a little bit about VOAD? I think what's the acronym stand for? That's a quiz.
Volunteer agency or
organizations
active in disaster.
Yeah, and that's in your community. A lot of organizations, even some organizations had COAD. What's COAD stand for?
It's a community organization.
Right.
Key
and
difference.
If you don't have one in your community, start one.
Yeah.
And a lot of your community also have long-term recovery communities. And those are you're going to see organizations all in all three buckets or all three sides. They're all involved, just different stages of the emergency management spectrum. But get involved.
So it comes back to the reason there's an emergency support function is coordination, cooperation, in order to make sure that we're getting the most effective service delivery, and filling in, Lee, you keep on going there and I love it, is filling in those gaps. Every disaster is a local response. It doesn't matter if it's all the way from, as we saw last summer, from the panhandle of Florida up through the East Coast, through North Carolina. Each one of those communities, they care what happened in the rest in the country. But when it's affected them, it really comes down to, I care what's affected me and what's available to fit my needs. Sometimes it's, you're more cut off road. So how do you get your canteens up into mountain roads? And you have to be innovative and creative. And so you are trying to find ways, maybe within the other support functions, to drop food supplies. And that's where coordination within that disaster response framework is critical, because you don't have to be an expert on everything. You just have to know your lane, stay within that lane, and find somebody else who's the expert or has the capability and willingness to do it.
Yeah. And go back to it always start locally and
locally.
locally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's where we go. So people are familiar with that initial preparation, kind of initial response phase. We're, behind a bulldozer that's clearing the way with downed trees down 49 going onto the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Canteens are getting into place, the feeding units are there, the volunteers are starting to roll into town. The cameras are there, right? The national news, they're telling everybody at it. 24 hours later, all the news are gone and the visible side's going on, and power's starting to come back on. But you guys are still there. And that's where mass care still, it's not something that once everything's in place, Lee, you just pull your hands off. You're engaged for really the long term. And so let's talk about that intermediate and transition to long-term recovery, because people don't see that. And it's a lost piece of disaster response, and it's probably also the most expensive piece and time-consuming piece for manpower and every other thing we have.
Yeah. So once the immediate need is taken care of, you start I'm going to look at both partners. You guys can start jumping in. The other human services needs start, kind of come on board, kind of become visible.
Right.
One thing I can think of is, disaster case management. Yeah, kind of supporting that individual family, kind of going through the process. And then there's crisis counseling. And then I think both organizations have spiritual care.
We do.
For that, that's a key. That's a very, very key component. Anything else I know there's additional.
I think for us, we really focus on that immediate response and those earlier phases of recovery. And one of the key things that we can do in a community is serve as kind of a convener to help bring together to the different organizations. If you've got local committees that are standing up, and help that community figure out, hey, what does that long-term road to recovery kind of look like, and who is going to be best positioned to help lead that? Because in a lot of communities, for a lot of responses, that's going to be a long road, and having that be locally led is going to make a lot of difference for that community.
Which means go ahead, Will.
Oh, I was just going to say that from our side, and you're right, it is largely locally led, because as Lee said, everything begins and ends locally. I know from our perspective, a lot of things people don't think about is, yes, like this family over here may not have been directly impacted by the tornado. Maybe their house wasn't damaged, but the power that was knocked out made all their food go rotten.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now that family has a fridge full of food that they can no longer eat, and they've got to throw all that food out. And so now you're talking about that intermediate phase of disaster where, okay, we fed you all the immediate meals for the people cleaning up the debris, getting their houses repaired, things like that. But now we need to bring in food boxes. We need to bring in gift cards. We need to bring in disaster case management to talk about people who may have been secondarily impacted without being primarily impacted. But then to your point, the biggest one really is long-term recovery. Because after the cameras have gone, people have forgotten, people have moved on. The disaster's over in people's minds, but it's not over for the victim. I mean, that FEMA process, that the appeals process, and then you get into sometimes the state processes, like when you're after FEMA's exhausted, you can go to states and things like that. That process can take a year, 2 years. And so when you're dealing with situations like that, like we just finished up, believe it or not, a $3 million Hurricane Ida long-term recovery. 3 years later, we're still talking about Hurricane Ida, and we're still funding all the way up through March. We were still buying furniture, we were still buying appliances, we were still buying clothes for families that were impacted 3 years ago, because this process sometimes can take that long. And so when a lot of people hear about disaster, you get that initial 24, 48 hour, I want to give, I want to help. But what's really important for people to remember is you're giving more than just to the response. You're giving to the intermediate response also, and you're giving to the long-term recovery. So it's not just a gift right there at the beginning. It helps all the way down the road.
And there's a process that it goes through the size of a disaster determines the amount of state and federal resources, to your pointer, that are flowing down. A lot of people, the way MDHS works, and this, I don't know if y'all are familiar with replacement SNAP. Replacement SNAP is our current SNAP beneficiaries. They're at their, it's day to day for them anyway. Yeah. And now we come to the point they have lost electricity. And the great thing about it, the rule on replacement SNAP is current SNAP beneficiaries who have had a power outage over 6 hours can go to our website and immediately start filling out that form to have those benefits replaced for that last month. Then, if we get a federal disaster declaration, which could take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month for that to come down, we move into what's sometimes called automatic replacement, where we can just push those to everybody's cards, and then we can get some hot food waivers, some other types of waivers that once the power grid is coming back on, it allows in local areas for the beneficiaries to use their SNAP benefits for hot meals. Because again, they may have lost their stove, they may still be struggling to get those resources back. But again, it's pushing money back into those local communities for those local victims of a disaster to actually respond. And then we also will work with you to get our EA team will put in for what's called DSNAP, which is non-current SNAP recipients that may have had loss. So we can get that same type of replacement benefit. But again, it's working with and knowing what the Salvation Army, Red Cross, Lutherans, everybody's bringing to town to do. But then there's another piece, and I'm going to hit it. We're getting up on some time, but there's also taking into consideration in mass care that you don't have a negative effect on the economy of a local community.
Definitely.
Because you've got to know you're bringing all that foodstuffs in, but as power's coming back on and a local restaurant, a local business is starting to open back up, doing an influx of making cash gifts to an organization like y'all allows you to put a gift card. Maybe later, not immediately. Those take times to roll in, and coordinated that network and of assistance so that we're not affecting negatively. That's why ESF6 again operates. We don't want to have a negative impact on our compassion into a community.
Absolutely, and when we talk about preparing meals, we want to prepare meals locally where we can, and especially in the early phases of a disaster, we really do try to work with locally owned small restaurants that really represent what the community looks like, because the type of food that they're going to prepare, that's going to be the food that community is going to be most comfortable with, and there's a lot of psychological benefit that comes with that, and that of course also helps that local economy. Also we do make significant purchases, on the local economy as well. But that's always a balance, figuring out, okay, what do we currently have, locally? What do we have, in like national inventories? What can we purchase locally? What can the economy support? And what do other organizations have that can be brought to bear?
And Chase is spot on. It's important regionally because we know our Baptist partners. Shout out to our Baptist partners.
Yeah,
they're amazing.
Yeah, they are
absolutely amazing. But you're talking about you get a disaster here in Mississippi, you may get a Baptist partner from North Carolina. Well, what they're comfortable cooking may not necessarily be what the Mississippi community, the community here locally, is comfortable eating. So that does take some work and some coordination to make sure that we're preparing what the community needs, what the community wants. And I think one of the biggest things, to touch on what Chase was saying, was using the local economy, but also knowing when it's time to step back. Because at a certain point, disaster feeding can very easily trickle into becoming poverty feeding. And that can sometimes take money directly out of the local economy when they're like, well, I could go and eat here or buy groceries or things like that, but they're still here serving. So my power may have been on for a week, but I'm going to go over here and grab a meal for free instead. And you don't want that. You want to make sure the economy is still running.
And that goes to the point of why we have an ESF6 mass care coordinator working within MEMA, working year-round, even external of an activation of the EOC. Cooperation, coordination, so that you can maximize the work and have minimal effect on negative effect and have maximum positive effect on people's lives.
We
And-
are so blessed to have Lee.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We
And
love
I
it.
kind of thank you, and I kind of touch on one key thing I want to talk about my job. A lot of steady stay, blue sky, gray sky days. One key thing is just having great partnership and facilitate a conversation. And I say my both partner are very good at understanding the local needs and then analysis wise. And I also look to my partner to understand how big is this bread box? What are we needing right now? But yeah, go back to that point. I never want to have the difficult conversation to tell a partner and say, not saying you need to stop meeting. Help me understand why you still feeding. What am I missing something? Power is back on, everybody's back home, and we only have, say, X number of major destroy dwelling, and people seems like are doing okay. What's going on? And it could be possibly a partner say, hey, there's a pre-existing poverty level here, and then there's a need here. So maybe we're looking at, maybe go back to the social services, go back to us, go back to the state agency. Are there a barrier that I can support removing that?
But that speaks to the activation of a long-term recovery committee.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the best example we saw that was in Rolling Fork. When Rolling Fork was national news and
Yes,
it
yes.
was everywhere, and
Yeah.
so everybody and their brother. I mean, we're pumping 100,000 meals into
People are just
a town.
self-deploying.
Exactly,
They're
they were
going, they
self-deploying.
got a food truck, they're going down there.
And
Yeah.
it was one of those things where because it was national news, everyone felt like they needed to be a part
Yes.
of it. They needed to be there. But when you got a community of 10,000 people, but you're trying to put 50,000 meals a day into this community of 10,000 people, it
Right.
was just too much. It was.
And the perspective that everybody had of Rolling Fork, again, you forget Belzona, Humphreys County,
Correct.
Carroll County, Montgomery, Winona,
yeah.
Grenada, Monroe County, all the way over that swath.
Emory.
And y'all all visited, and you noticed that the further away you got from Rolling Fork, empty. And that's where I love, it comes back to the work that MDHS did. Outside of what we would normally do, you coordinated some long-term recovery case management component with St. Vincent de Paul. And that is still ongoing now over 2 years after that storm. And it points to this. In many cases, we say that Mass Care, the Salvation Army, the Red Cross are the first ones in and the last ones out. In reality, you're already there. You're embedded in communities, your compassion, and personally, Lee has a direct connection to the Red Cross. I love that. And I have a personal connection to the Salvation Army.
Right.
And knowing that you're embedded with local units across the state, essentially 30 corps in 3 states, but even your service units equate to upwards of 90 units. And so wherever you see a Salvation Army thrift store, and you got local Baptist churches, we got 3,000 Mississippi Baptist churches, and all of those are already there. And mass care happens on a daily basis within the state of Mississippi. It's the beauty of Mississippi, but there's also the tragedy that there is so much poverty, but there's so much compassion, there's so much coordination going on, and thank you for the work that y'all do, not only your organizations, but to your other partners that you facilitate your work through. Lee, thank you for the work that you do. And I'm going to leave this to y'all. We're coming to the end. Is there anything that we haven't covered in regards to mass care, but also anything that we can leave people as we enter into the hurricane season and also hopefully get some views on this going into the fall tornado season?
I just want to put it out there. Thinking is the first step of preparedness. Just think and then have a conversation with people you love and kind of just say, very simple act. When an emergency happened, how do I get in touch with you? And go through the different situation, because it's not always we all sitting on the couch watching TV. That's when the emergency happened. So thank you for having me. Thinking is the first step of preparedness.
Chase, you want to leave us with anything?
Yeah, sure. The Red Cross, our mission really is driven by the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. Encourage anyone that thinks that they might enjoy, helping out their fellow community members, or even, deploying outside of the state to help with larger scale disasters. Sign up. Go to redcross.org. It's an easy process. The training's not terribly complex. And the other piece to that is generosity of donors. We're not funded by the government. We are funded by the generosity of the American people. And giving those financial contributions is a great way to turn that compassion into action, even if you individually aren't able to go yourself and help.
Well,
I'm just going to mirror what Chase said. If you want to volunteer, sign up to volunteer. You can work locally with your local Salvation Army Corps, disaster.salvationarmyusa.org. Great place to sign up. But as he said, we're not funded by the government. Most of our stuff does not get reimbursements, but we were just touching on Rolling Fork. We talked about the $3 million long-term recovery program for Ida, Rolling Fork. We had the blessings of the generosity of the American people, and we're running a $500,000 long-term recovery program for all of those, ranging all the way from Humphreys and Sharkey's all the way up through Amory in several different long-term recovery committees. And it's because the people see the need and they answer the call. So I just want to take a second and thank people also, and not just talk about what they can do for us in the future, but thank them for what they've done for us in the past, because we're able to do the things we're able to do because of those generous gifts.
you guys do amazing work. Mississippi is blessed to have such a strong ESF6 coordination going on, and our hopes and prayers are for a peaceful hurricane season, but we also know that the hands and feet of good will also be going out into communities no matter what the storm happens. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.